Welcome back to Daily Flash. I'm Riesa, Pascal, along with Mitch English. What does it mean to be gluten-free? Well, a gluten-free diet is essentially for people managing the signs and symptoms of celiac disease. But how do you know if you are gluten intolerant? Here to help us answer these questions is dietitian and nutritionist Meg Gerber. Meg, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I think this is an important conversation. And I think first we should start with what is celiac disease? How is it treated? What foods contain gluten? I think these are some of the common questions that surround this conversation.
Yeah. So celiac disease is an autoimmune disease. Essentially, the body reacts and attacks itself when gluten is ingested. You basically have damage to the finger-like projections lining the small intestine, and the gut lining essentially looks like a mowed lawn. It's very traditionally treated with a gluten-free diet, but in my functional nutrition practice, we really go beyond that gluten-free food prescription, and we use a multifaceted approach that includes stress management, individualized nutrition, and targeted supplements. In respect to your question, what foods contain gluten? It's in wheat, barley, rye, and then also oats. So oats on their own are gluten-free, but due to cross-contamination in the growing process, they are not actually typically gluten-free unless you get a certified gluten-free oat. Gluten is very sneaky. It's in things like soy sauce, Rice Krispie cereal, salad dressing, chicken stock, sushi rice. So it can get a little tricky for a celiac.
That's amazing, because I know it's perhaps very, very ignorant, but you tend to just associate it with bread because that's what we tend to hear. I can't have bread or rice or whatever it is. So it's so fascinating to hear you talk about some of those lesser known foods that do contain gluten. So with that being said, what foods should you eat if you are gluten intolerant?
Yeah, so I like to call these the OG gluten-free foods. So the whole foods that were gluten-free all along. Things like fruits, veggies, potatoes, meats, seafood, eggs, beans, avocado. These are, just naturally gluten-free. And I think that we rush to overcomplicate it and think, oh my gosh, how do I get a gluten-free bread, a gluten-free pasta? And starting with those foods that were just whole foods, naturally gluten-free without a gluten-free label are wonderful. And then just to know, there's some grains that are gluten-free. So things like rice, certified gluten-free oats, millet, buckwheat, quinoa, those are all naturally gluten-free grains.
All right, so we don't have to totally cut grains out entirely if we are gluten intolerant. Now, many people avoid gluten even if they don't have issues. Why is that?
Yeah, so even if you haven't been diagnosed with celiac, many people just find that they don't do well with gluten. They feel like they have bloating, stomach pain, inflammatory symptoms like swollen joints. It's mainly because the gluten of today isn't the gluten of our ancestry. It's a highly processed, hybridized form of wheat that's harder to digest. And Harvard researchers have shown that gluten actually does trigger an inflammatory response in all people. So no human body can completely effectively digest gluten. There's a spectrum based on that study, based on that research. Eating gluten essentially creates these little teeny tiny holes in the gut referred to as leaky gut, which creates this inflammatory immune response. Picture like a above ground swimming pool that one of the walls becomes damaged and the water is no longer staying inside that pool where it's supposed to. I will just also say, in addition, most gluten crops are sprayed with Roundup. This is the active chemical in this pesticide is known as glyphosate. And this is now known to cause certain forms of cancer, autoimmune, and asthma. So kind of as a take-home message, reducing or eliminating gluten can be an easy win for those with tummy issues. And so instead of feeling overwhelmed by that, even starting small with just eating less gluten, using my gluten-free cookbook, for example, eating some of those OG gluten-free foods can be a great way to start to just support for people who have tummy issues.
You have such excellent advice you're sharing with us. I have one more question for advice. What should we do for entertaining guests who are gluten-free? I think right now, with the holidays, we're going to be cooking a lot of meals and we want everyone to feel included. Can you share some tips on how to deal with that?
Totally, yes. I talk about this a lot in my cookbook because it's important for anyone with eating gluten-free or dealing with an autoimmune disease to feel seen and supported. And even asking them, how can I support you, or what can I make for you? I really think the best way you can do that is by having food that they can eat at your holiday get-together. And my cookbook is a wonderful resource for that. It's called How to Glow Gluten-Free. And my website also has a bunch of free recipes because I love to cook. A raw crudité with hummus and cheese and gluten-free crackers can be an easy win appetizer for gluten-free guests, but also maybe providing an appetizer that's just like very fun and delicious that no one even notices is gluten-free, and you can serve it to the masses. My Mediterranean 7-layer dip is a wonderful option. That's in the cookbook. And then some entrees to highlight. I have some crispy fish tacos, as well as my no sugar pad thai. Great for just entertaining a crowd.
Oh, sounds delicious, Meg. Thank you for joining us. If you want more information, you can get a copy of Meg's book, How to Grow Gluten-Free, at groundednourish.com.